Well, kia ora and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming into my new space. It's lovely to have you. I am really excited to have you all here today for this webinar on asking tricky questions, because I think we could do with asking a whole lot more of them. Now, I'm not going to let anybody else in soon because it's 1:03. So if they really wanted to be here, maybe they should have arrived on time. But there's an excellent little gang of you with me already. So that's very exciting. Now, I'm just going to turn off my computer sound so that I don't hear all your binging, because it's driving me flippin' mad. Thank you very much. And I'd like to know, where are you all dialing in from today? Let's jump in the chat. Where are you coming from? I'm clearly in my house. Where are you? Oh, Wanganui, Tauranga. Oh, a bunch of you from Tauranga. Melbourne, Wellington, Perth, Auckland, Wellington, Sydney. Port Melbourne. Oh, Parramatta, just around the corner, mate. Auckland, Plympton, oh, very close. Yes, we are really close. Oh, Australia, the Riviera of the South, Dunedin. Come on, mate. All right, very good. And a bunch of you from Wellington. And Liz is in Sydney. Well, welcome everyone. We've got an excellent spread of people from all over the place. Now, I was in Parramatta, but I'm now in Whitby, also known as Fitby, Whiteby, and Shitby by those that don't think very much of it. So I think maybe we'll just leave that there. But that's fine. All right, let's jump straight in on brand. I want to know from you guys, who do you think are good at asking questions? Maybe it's a person you know, maybe it's a profession. Who do you think is really good at asking questions already? Kids, oh my God, I reckon, eh? Why? Why? Why is the sky blue? Why is that man so fat? Shh. Facilitators, says Rebecca, yes. Journalists. Oh my God, wives. That's probably the best answer yet. Cool, coaches, journalists, reporters. This is great. John Campbell, what a man. What a man. Lawyers, accountants. Mine doesn't ask too many questions, and I think it's probably better that way. Oh, Kim Hill, my hero. Oh yeah, Kim and Susie. I wish we were friends. Counsellors, auditors. Your daughter, Terry. Yeah, mine are pretty good at asking questions. Usually ones I don't want to answer, actually. Yeah, brilliant. So I think that some professions, yeah, psychologists, that's another good one, the police, some professions are taught from word go how to ask questions. It's a tool of their trade, and you guys have picked most of them out, whether you're a cop or you're a counsellor or you're a journalist. You're taught from day dot, your job's asking questions, right? And I think that's great, but I don't think that's universal. In fact, I reckon there's a bunch of us that have been taught almost exclusively to give answers. Yeah, so I reckon there's a whole paradigm there where we're taught right from uni, in fact, right from school through uni and into the workforce, that our job is to know things. And so our value lies in what we can tell you. And I think that gets really clear and becomes particularly worrying when people get promoted. And all of a sudden, they're leaders, or they're in charge of leading a team or an organization or a business, and they've got a whole lot of really clever people working for them, but they haven't twigged yet that their job's actually to ask those people questions. They think their job is still to have the answers. And this is particularly challenging if you're in a really technical or specialist field. So I work with a bunch of engineers and also statisticians, and they find it really hard once they're around the top table to stop knowing everything. In fact, I see it even with boards. One of the most challenging combinations of people to have on a governance board is someone who was in the industry for a long time and is now retired, because not only do they think they know everything and they know just enough to ask tricky questions, their knowledge is outdated. And where it can be really exhausting, if you're a boss now, is you think you still need to know everything. And so you invest a whole lot of energy into doing that, into keeping up with what's going on, into micromanaging, knowing the details of projects, keeping up with all the information. And that detracts from the time that you can spend actually leading. And I don't think this is just true for leaders. I think this is true for everyone. Unless you were lucky enough to do a BA, maybe you didn't get taught the art of critical thinking and questioning from an early standpoint. And maybe this is going to be a challenge for you. Yeah. So I think that leader is expert or professional is expert paradigm is starting to shift. And Peter Drucker defines a knowledge worker as someone who knows more about their job than their boss does. And I reckon that's great. I reckon that's most of us, and as it should be, but it's not going to work if we don't know how to ask the right questions. But that's not just true of the boss. This is true for everyone. So I'm quite keen to know what you think. What happens when we don't ask enough questions? What are the dangers? Oh, Luke, we assume, straight on it. Group think. We assume things. Oh, yeah, we just think we already know. We don't have the full picture. Yeah, and that can be more dangerous than none of it, eh, Rebecca? Like, we've got a bit of it. Yeah, Kim says the same thing. We get half the story, just enough information to be dangerous. Yeah, low trust, poor decisions, limitations. We don't get to the root cause. I love that one, Sue. Yeah, we don't know what's really going on. Like, we can put some Band-Aids on things. Symptoms, not problems, Rebecca, exactly. We can Band-Aid the stuff that we can see. We can do symptom work, but we don't necessarily know what's actually going on. We're solving the wrong problem, exactly. Blind spots, reduction in trust. That's a really good one, Steve. So our relationships suffer when we don't ask enough. We can be misled, absolutely. And Kelly says, yeah, but sometimes you've got to ask to make decisions without asking all the questions, mate. We don't have time. Absolutely, totally. There is a time and a place for just grabbing a piece of your expertise, applying it and moving on. We don't build capability. Yeah, and what I'd add to that, Claire, is that we lose a lot of opportunity for learning, right? So what I always think about with this one is, for those of you, who's got kids on the call? Put your hand up if you've got kids. Yeah, sorry, I'm tired too, mate. So when your kids start learning to spell, right, and they're at school and they go, Mom, how do you spell? You know, how do you spell? This happens about 12 times a week. And the classic parent response for this, and it drives my kids nuts, is, how do you think you spell, right? And what's useful about that, about giving the question back, is all of a sudden, rather than just trotting out an answer, you've created this amazing opportunity to learn on both ends. So if the kid gets it right, they're like, oh, awesome, I'm actually quite good. And you're like, oh, good, my kid's not a total idiot, this is great. Or if they struggle with it, you get to see which bit they struggle with, you know, and then you get to teach the rule rather than the answer. So they're trying to write receive and they get things around the wrong way and you're like, oh yeah, no, usually it is I before E, but not after C, right? And then they've got that and they know that. And they don't just know that for that specific problem, but they know it for next time they confront that, except also, you know, it's the English language, so there's probably 12 other exceptions to it, but let's not go there. You know, so all of a sudden we've had this opportunity to learn on both sides. And when we don't ask questions and we default straight to answers, we just give that up. So I reckon jumping on Hayley's point there and also on Kelly earlier, who said, mate, you don't always have time to ask questions. Sometimes you just need to make decisions. Absolutely. And when things are really clear cut and things are really simple and you look at a situation in front of you, whether it's personal or whether it's at work, and you go, I've seen this before. I know this inside and out. There are very few variables in this that don't make sense to me. I've responded to a situation like this before and had positive results. I'm just going to do that. Cool, do that. When things are a little bit more ambiguous and things are a bit trickier, there's people involved or there's factors involved that maybe aren't quite so clear, that's when making snap decisions can be really dangerous, right? So yeah, totally. Sometimes you get 80% of the information, that's enough, crack on. You know, there's a point of diminishing returns for this. But if we are facing complexity or conflicting personalities or ambiguity, and we don't default to questions, we start running quite a serious risk. And I think that the world as we know it, and particularly at work, is probably less knowable than it's ever been. So there's a lot of stuff bandied around about how change is faster than usual. And actually, a lot of the data doesn't support that. It's not that we're changing more. It's that the kind of change that we're dealing with is a lot trickier than it used to be. Things are more interconnected and tangled up. You can't just solve a social problem or a financial problem or a technology problem. Everything's all mixed together, right? And so we pull one lever, 12 other things we didn't expect move, and we're like, did not see that coming, right? Or we're getting these shocks that seem to be appearing out of nowhere. And like, I'd argue with that too, because like pandemics aren't new, guys. Global crises aren't new. In fact, they're pretty regular. It's just that we've been quite privileged and entitled for the last 100 years and haven't had to do like a war or a pandemic or anything. So we're kind of like, oh my God, this is amazing. The world's never done this. And like our great grandparents are just rolling their eyes like, yeah, look, we probably did 3 of these a year for a bit. So you guys probably need to calm down. But anyway, things are less knowable than they used to be. Things don't make as much sense. And because of that, I think the art of asking good questions is really, really important. And when we don't ask enough, not only do we lose a whole bunch of like touchy-feely nice opportunities for, oh, we build trust, we collaborate, we get on well, this is nice, we learn, we actually run serious risks of doing the wrong things and of letting really deep systemic problems fester. All right. So I think it's important to ask good questions. And even if the world wasn't all like messed up, like Socrates knew this a couple of thousand years ago, eh? So his quote was, an unexamined life is not worth living. And what I think that speaks to is the idea that questions are a necessary component of change. Because if we don't question anything, what we're kind of saying is, yeah, this is cool. I'm happy with this the way it is. Yeah. And so things are better than they ever have been on most metrics. Like let's not be doomsday about this. The world's in better shape than it probably ever has been. And I think that we're always going to have problems, whether they're personal problems or whether they're social problems or whether they're problems at work. You know, you solve one thing and it just creates 12 other ones. And that's not a sign that things are failing. It's a sign that things are moving forward. And so I think problems are a bit like cockroaches or glitter, like the world will end and there'll still be them. You know, but if we're lucky, we can upgrade our problems. And I reckon that's the goal. You know, what problems would you rather have, whether it's at home or whether it's at work? And if we want to keep things moving and if we want change, then we have to ask questions about how things are. How are things now? What's working and what isn't? Why they like this? What are the things that are involved here? What are the potential opportunities for doing things differently? So you don't get change unless you ask questions. But asking tricky questions can be really hard to do. So back in the chat, why do you think it's hard to ask challenging questions? Because people are emotional. Bloody people and their feelings, Luke. Pain in the ass, aren't they? Because you want good relationships, because it makes people uncomfortable, confronting. I'm seeing the theme. Oh, we don't want to look stupid. Yeah. We're scared of the response. We don't want to offend people. People get defensive when you ask them tricky questions. Yes, they do. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. Oh, we might not know the answer. Mate, Terry's going deep. Kelly's worried people don't like him. Don't worry, mate. I like you. Liz says that requires us to do a bit of self-reflection. Yeah, we've got to step back. You know, in order to see an opportunity for a question, we've actually got to reflect on the situation in the first place. That's great. We're worried about breaking trust, or we don't have trust in the first place, says Ray. Yeah. It could challenge our reputation. I think that might be linked to the we don't want to look dumb, right? Like if we ask a question, it will look like we don't know what we're talking about. Oh, sometimes we already think we know the answer. Why would I ask a question? I've got this all figured out. Yeah, I love that. Oh, Claire, that's such a good answer. It can slow you down. Yeah, who's got time for questions? I've got shit to do. I don't have time to question the state of things. I've got 27 things on my to-do list. I've got 4 meetings today, and I haven't had a coffee since 11 o'clock. Absolutely. Yeah, we'll look silly that we don't know the answer. Isn't that funny? That is such a funny one. Steve's still cracking up about problems being like cockroaches. Yeah. We're worried about asking the wrong question. Yeah. Oh, Natalie, that's really deep. Okay, so we've got a culture of loaded questions, right? Where it's not really a question. It sounds like a question, but actually we already know the answer that we want to hear. And it's a statement or an opinion or a challenge that's already based on something that, yeah. And like politicians learn the art of this, don't they? Asking leading questions that are going to deliver their point. And I think that's really important. Anna says, whoa, I'm assuming that's in regard to Natalie's epic insight, because that's so good. Yeah, that is really good. And actually, that's a really useful segue, Natalie. So I like you a lot. Well, I like you anyway, but I really like you now. Because I think it's really hard to ask questions because most of the time they come with judgment. I think that's the number one thing that makes questions hard. And that's judgment in either direction, right? So either the questions that we're asking come with a layer of judgment of others or of a situation, right? Or because we're worried we're going to be judged. And you guys have all picked up on that. You've said, oh, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to look like an idiot. I need my job, thank you very much. I can't go around asking questions and letting people know that I bluffed my way in here and I don't know anything. You and me both, mate. But I think that's the most problematic component of questions when they're not asked well. And to be clear, questions put the ownership on the answerer in a way that is really delicate and uncomfortable, right? So in my spelling story, when Charlotte says, how do you spell the thing? And I go, Charlotte, how do you think you spell it? I'm giving the ownership back to her. She gave me some, and then I handed it back to her. And that is really delicate, and we need to handle it really carefully. And I don't always think we do. Like, it's a really hard thing to balance. If you are the person that is frustrated by everything around you, and you're like, God, why is everyone else so stupid? That comes across. And when you're rearing up and ready to ask those tricky questions, it can be really difficult, if you're not intentional, to do that in a way that doesn't put people on the defensive. Because here's the thing about judgment. Judgment mixes together people and problems, right? So when we ask a question with judgment, why is it like this? Why hasn't this been done? What that's actually saying is, why are you so useless? Yeah? Judgment, when we ask a question with judgment, we are conflating the problem we're trying to solve with the people that we're asking the question of. So whether that's a person that someone else we're asking, or ourselves, right? Who's a bit judgy here? Hand if you're a bit judgy. Yeah, oh, you're nice. We just got a whole gallery. I've got you on gallery view, a whole gallery of judgy people. I love this. Yeah, me too. I'm super judgy. And if you are a really motivated, values-driven, ambitious person, it's really hard not to be, because you're all out there trying to make things better. And so you're judging everything, right? That's okay. It's okay that you're judgy. But really, I'm only saying this to make myself feel better, because here's the thing about judgment. When we're judgy, we're projecting our own shit, right? So every one of you that put your hand up when you said you're judgy, are you also quite hard on yourself by any chance? Yeah, okay, emphatic nods. Yeah. So judgment starts here, and then we put it on to someone else, because something they've done's triggered us quite badly, and it's impossible to keep that out of the question when we're asking it if we're not aware of that. All right. And when we project our own bullshit, we're doing exactly what we don't want to do, which is muddling up ideas and identities, putting people and problems into the same basket. And so I think the best variety of tricky question asking is one that can put the judgment away. And the antidote, the number one antidote for judgment, is compassionate curiosity. Yeah? Compassionate curiosity. So there are two really important things about compassionate curiosity. One of them is that it separates people and problems. So what we do is we go, oh, why is this like this? Right? So I was in a meeting this week, and I was doing some strategy work with a leadership team, and no one had done the thing they were supposed to do. So there you go. Facilitator, teaching you guys how to get people to take action outside of the room. Still struggling with it, mate. People suck. We all do. This is life. Anyway, and there was a bit of a confrontation between the chief executive and the other people in the room. She's like, why hasn't anybody got this done? Right? I need to hear around the table, what happened here? Yeah. And people's faces, right? And they're trying to answer, and it's just like immediate defensiveness. They're like, yeah, and there was, and I opened it, but then, the thing happened, and then I couldn't do it, and so I couldn't get it done. And then it escalated, right? It got worse. And it was, actually, this is the third one of these we've done in 5 years, the strategy process. And it's all well and good in the room, and then nothing ever bloody happens afterwards. People don't actually implement it. And again, people shrunk, right? And they're like, we need to do better. We need to do better. And so what that conversation was doing at that point in time was it was putting the people and the problem like this, all tangled up together. Like, why are you so flippin' useless? Yeah? But what compassionate curiosity does is two things. It separates the people from the problems, and it does that by assuming positive intent. Yeah? That's the second component of compassionate curiosity. Separates people from problems, and it assumes positive intent. So all of a sudden, I chip in, probably time I spoke up, I'm supposed to be the facilitator. And then it's, okay, clearly we've got a problem that's been like this for ages. And no matter how hard we try, this seems to keep happening. So like, what's that about? Why is it really hard here for us to take the piece of paper and turn it into something? And then we started to have a conversation about some other things, which was actually the role of the leadership team and what being a member of the leadership team meant isn't totally clear. And so there's enough space in the calendar to do the 90-minute meeting a week, but not a lot else. And there's not a lot of clarity role-wise about what leading that would look like. with the rest of the team, right? And so there's a whole bunch of things in there, and we went on for a while about, okay, instead of going, why do you suck? When we go, what's this about? Why is it so hard? I mean, everyone here in this room cares about this place, gets up to do a good job, comes into work every day and does their best, but it's not working. So what's not working? And that's a totally different conversation, because we've assumed positive intent. And I firmly believe 100%, here we go, here's some good maths for you. 100% of the time, I believe that 80% of the time, positive intent is the right choice, right? I think 2 times out of 10, the person's just an asshole and they suck. Yeah. But 80% of the time, people genuinely care and are trying their best. And so if we assume it all the time, then we're going to get better results. And here's the other thing. If we assume positive intent from someone that doesn't have it, they're still much more likely to perform and meet our expectations than if we treat them like the asshole they are. Right? Because when you criticize someone and you express your disappointment with them, that doesn't make them go, well, now that they've told me how crap I am, I feel empowered to go on and be less crap. Right? They just don't trust you anymore. And then there's conflict, and then they feel smaller. And then over time, trust erodes. And then, I mean, maybe you can fire them, or maybe you're stuck with them. But if we assume positive intent of everyone, then we're much more inclined to have them meet our expectations if they currently suck, but also to solve the real problem. And so compassionate curiosity is about going, here's this problem we've got. Should we poke at it together? Why does it do that? Where did that come from? What underpins that, right? And so that's the tone we need when we ask tricky questions. So those of you that have been to one of my webinars before know that there are a couple of things I like to do. And one of them is to make things easy. So I'm about to do that. And the second thing is I really like alliteration. So here's some alliteration I prepared for you earlier. I reckon when it comes to asking good, tricky questions, there are 3 components to it. And I've decided, because the English language is beautiful and has a lot of variety, that they all start with T. All right. So if you do have a pen and paper, show me if you've got a pen and paper. Oh man, you guys are so prepared. I'm so into you nerds. Like, my webinar attendees are exclusively nerds and I live for it. I love it. I reckon there's 3 components and they all start with T. So I'm gonna get my handy dandy flipboard, which now has all this space, like it's not living jammed up behind a TV cabinet. Isn't that so nice? All right, I reckon there's 3 things. And we've just talked about the first one, right? So the first one is about tone. If you get your tone wrong, and you're coming from a place of judgment rather than compassionate curiosity, it's really impossible to even establish the base conditions for earning the right to ask tricky questions, right? So if you feel yourself getting judgy, either of yourself or of others, just step back, man, because that's going to come out. All right, so tone's really important. This one's all about compassionate curiosity. I reckon the second one is about type, all right? So when it comes to the types of questions, there are good ones and there are less helpful ones. And what I'm about to say is not news to you. Like most information that's actually helpful, it's common sense and you've heard it before. So when we ask tricky questions, we need to make sure that we're asking open ones, not closed ones. Yeah, and you're all like, yeah, of course, Alicia, you ask open questions. We don't ask yes or no questions. But yes or no questions don't always sound like we think they do. So sometimes they use judgy words like would, or should we do this? Would we do that? They ask things like, are we going to do this or are we not? That's a yes or no question. Do you think that is, right? So you see all these leading things that sound like they could be open. We're saying, hey, give me your opinion. We're not asking for your opinion, all right? We're asking for an answer. So tricky questions don't have an answer that you can predetermine ahead of time. They're open. And this is where that journalist thing comes into play. It's really easy. It's ask questions that start with the 5 W's, one of which isn't. Yeah. So it's why? Why is this like this? Why does this happen all the time? It's where, when, how, what? What is this about? What contributes to this? What else does this affect? Yeah. So it's zooming out and it's thinking like a journalist and going, if I had to put this story together like I didn't know anything, what are the questions I'd need to know to gather the context, right? Because the leading line is always context when you're writing a news article. Start with context. What's the context here? And how does it work? And you can't go in with a predetermined answer of whether it's a yes or a no, or an A or a B, or option 1 or option 4. You can do that in specific situations, but for complex, ambiguous, tricky problems, you've got to assume that you just don't know and ask good open ones. So we're starting with our tone, compassionate curiosity, taking the judgment out. We're asking the right type. We're checking ourselves. Are these open questions or closed questions? Right. And this is back to that point about leading ones. Like this is, I think that was you, Nat, wasn't it? As it sounds like a question, not actually a question. Me telling you what I already think. And I reckon we've all probably heard a few of those. And the third one, oh, it starts with T. What a coincidence. The third one is about timing. And this one is so, so, so important. And for those of you who are serial challengers, which I think is probably most of you, and you're frustrated by things and you want to crack on, you're like, no one's asking the hard questions around here. Fuck it, I'm going to do it. Oh, anyone with a problem with swearing? Too late anyway? It's probably too late anyway, sorry. I should really put that in the briefing. You have to earn the right to ask tricky questions of someone. You do not automatically have that right. You do have the right to ask tricky questions of yourself. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I've just said it and then I didn't like how it sounded. No, you don't even have the right to ask tricky questions of yourself until you're coming from a nice place. Actually, you don't. Unless you're loving yourself first, unless you're assuming that you're great and then going, hey, Alicia, you're usually great. Why have you been so useless at this week? Unless you're coming at it like that, you do not have the right. But particularly with other people, you don't just automatically have the license to challenge them on things. Right? There's a timing thing, and that's all about sequencing. And so in meetings that matter, we talk about establishing the necessary preconditions for having really good strategic conversations. And the baseline condition for that is trust. And a bunch of you said that really early on, right? So unless there is trust between you and the person that you're speaking with, or more broadly, the group of people that are involved, you don't have the right to start poking them. And even if you do, it's not going to get you anywhere. What you're going to get back is defensiveness and fear, because it's going to sound like blame. So unless you have got trust that exists already in a relationship or in a dynamic, you cannot go about asking those really hard questions yet. Right? You have to do that first. And I know it's slow, isn't it? One of you said, oh, questions are annoying because they're slow. Yeah, but it's kind of a slingshot thing. So if we invest in establishing trust, and if we've taken our time to ask the right questions and we've done that consistently, a lot of other things speed up, right? So making snap decisions is often a false economy, and putting band-aid solutions on things and symptoms is a false economy as well, because it's going to help us this week, but it's not going to help us in the long run. We're going to suffer for it financially or otherwise, time-wise, further down the track. So the time that we invest in establishing trust in our working relationships and our personal relationships is really important. And then if we take the meetings that matter model, so we go, right, first necessary precondition, trust. Second one's all about purpose, right? And what that really means is if people don't care, doesn't matter. So if you're trying to poke around and ask tricky questions about something that nobody really gives a shit about, or they can't see why it's important that you challenge it in the first place, you just look like a troublemaker. You look like someone who's criticizing for no reason and looking for problems where they don't exist. And there's always that guy in the room that's like, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? And for not broken, don't fix it guy, you can't just explain to him why it's really important that he listens and be like, don't you realize how shit everything is? Because we're back to judgment, right? What we have to do is go, so why is this really important, right? So then we've got to ask questions about like, what are the costs of the status quo at the moment? If we keep going like this, what do we think might happen? Or on a more positive note, man, if we could stop wasting so much time and, you know, pick a work example, if we didn't have 6 different platforms that didn't speak to each other, what do you reckon that would be like? What would the benefits of that be? And then people tell you, right? They're like, oh man, it would save so much time. And like, I'd just feel better coming to work and I wouldn't have to have a wine every Tuesday. And, you know, people, the morale would go up and we'd make more money and we'd deliver better service because we'd be more responsive to our customers, you know, whatever. You've actually got to ask the questions to establish the purpose. And until people care, until they're locked in and connected to the thing you're talking about in the first place, there's no use you poking around challenging everything, because you just look like someone that's a bit of a muckraker, and we don't want that, right? So we've got to have that trust. People have to know that you aren't judging them. People have to know that you're in it for the right reason and that you believe in them. And demonstrating trust and positive intent doesn't happen in like big Love Actually moments. Trust isn't about the CEO standing up at the leadership forum and saying, I believe in you. That is not trust. Trust is demonstrated in tiny little increments, little deposits into a bank account. You did the thing you said you'd do when you said you'd do it. You were nice to me when I made a small mistake. You were flexible when my kid was sick, right? Those tiny things, those are the things that build trust. So you got trust. Yeah. You've got purpose. People care. They're connected to why the thing matters that you're about to poke around in. Then you get to start asking the challenging questions. And I won't go into the full process for that today for timing, but the two most important things to take away from that are the trust and the purpose. In Meetings That Matter, we talk about how you then move into focus, right? So tricky problems are really big. They're always really big. And there's a certain point where after you've built understanding for a while and you've really poked around, you then have to go, cool. So out of these 500 components, where's the thing where we can have the impact and that we've got influence over? And let's carve a bit off for us and set some priorities. And then we've got focus. And once we've got that, we can start to actually get some commitment happening and get some momentum moving, right? So, but it's the point of this is that it's a sequencing issue. So when it comes to asking tricky questions, number one thing is tone. And in the chat, we don't want judgment. The antidote for judgment is what? Yeah, compassion. That's right. Compassionate curiosity, Hayley, you've got it. Yeah, we assume positive intent and we separate the people from the problems. It's really simple. We just go, most people are actually pretty good. So if something's wrong, it's probably for a reason. And this is one of those things that's a lot easier for me to tell you than it is for you to do, or for me to say than for me to do, right? Because it's really easy to be triggered by things. And when they're loaded and they come up against your values, that gets particularly difficult, where you're like, no, but you're clearly a racist, misogynist bigot, so I don't have any compassion for you because you must be an asshole. And then going, oh, I have to shut that down. Hold on. Yeah, I can see why you might think like that. What do you think that's about? How do you think that works? Right? And I'm going to admit to having called someone a misogynist prick on a work call this week. So look, it's a work in progress. But did say those words out loud. I am lucky to have a job. But I think always coming back to assuming positive intent and going, oh, but actually this guy, he's quite good at his job. He does good things. I do like him. If he's a misogynist prick, which he isn't really, it's quite harsh. What's that about? And then if I did want to change that, and here's the important thing, right? Because questions and change are linked together. If I actually wanted to change that, I wanted to change the way he thought or the way the place worked, the way for me to do that actually isn't judging him. So taking out of it my own value judgments, if what I want is for things to be different, then my path there never has blame and finger pointing in it. It just doesn't work. It feels good. Feels good in the meeting when I snap, but it doesn't actually take you there. So even if you are dealing with an utter asshole, they're not going to become less of one if you judge them. And so this is real be a bigger person stuff, but you guys are bigger people anyway, because you're here. So compassionate curiosity, it's all about assuming positive intent and taking the people out of the problem. And again, this is a whole module in Meetings That Matter where we talk about conflict is actually what happens when ideas and identities get mixed together, and that the job of a facilitator or of a leader who's leading strategic conversations is to actually push those two things apart and go, okay, there's ideas over here, there's identities over here, and that a good leader or a good conversationalist or a good facilitator doesn't let them get mixed up, but also doesn't play into one or the other. So you can't change people's feelings with facts. It'd be nice if you could, and those of you in the room are like, but I love facts, I'm a left brainer. I know, and one of my worst habits is going, yeah, the data doesn't really support that. Turns out that doesn't necessarily change people's minds, right? But you also can't come up against facts with feelings, right? The two don't work. And so what we need to do as facilitators and people and leaders is to find the sweet spot in the middle, right? That goes, well, if ideas are all about facts, and identities are all about beliefs, then the bit in the middle is probably something like values, right? And that's a shared space that we can agree on together. We can talk about values, we can talk about purpose, we can create a narrative, but every time we get stuck in ideology over here, or just facts and figures over here, we're on a hiding to nothing. And so good questions are finding the spot in the middle that goes, where are the places that we can share? Because I believe we can, and I believe we care. And generally, and I say this generally, but generally, people who are annoying for you, so if you're in there, you're like, I've got tricky questions to ask, and you're coming up against someone who seems to be either really resistant or really defensive or a real pain in the ass, they're actually a real asset, because people don't behave like that unless they really care about something. And so if you're coming up against someone who's particularly resistant, what that means is, I really care about this thing, but I'm feeling like my identity is being threatened. I'm feeling like I'm going to lose something, or you're saying something about me that I can't handle. And so all you have to do is work with the good bit, which is that they care, and take all the judgment out. I had a meeting this morning for a conference I'm speaking at, and most of the conference attendees are just like super old white dudes. That's who they are, which is like my favorite group to play in, right? And the guy was telling me, look, Alicia, I do need to be honest with you. They're quite resistant to change, and they are quite defensive. So we do need to ruffle their feathers, and that's why we're bringing you in, but they are quite resistant to change. And all I'm thinking is, great, here's a group of people that really care. Like, yeah, we've got some pesky identity stuff to get out of the way so that I can make sure that they don't feel like I'm saying, the world has changed and you are no longer relevant, or the world has changed and everything you've done till now has been wrong. That's an opportunity for me to stand up and go, man, world's crazy, isn't it? And we wouldn't even be here together in this room if it wasn't for the history that we've shared together. If it wasn't for all the work that you've done and the sacrifices you've made and the investment that you've made, we wouldn't even be here having this conversation, right? Because every system is designed or produces the results that it's designed to, right? And they were all created for a good reason. So this was absolutely awesome when we put it together. But man, what's happened in the world now? All of this stuff. Cool. So how do you think we can meet those challenges together? What do we need to do? And that's a totally different conversation to, you need to get your shit together now, old man. Right. So compassionate curiosity. Tone, type, and timing. And the problem is, I think sometimes we get one of them right, but not the rest of them, So if we've got our tone right, no judgment, we're asking the right kind of questions, but we haven't yet earned the right to ask the really hard ones. This is really good because we get some understanding, but we're unlikely to get action. Yeah. So the good thing about this bit is understanding, but the bad bit's inaction, because if we haven't taken enough time to nurture that process, people will just nod their heads, but they won't actually do anything because they're not invested in it. So we get inaction. Or if we've got like the type of question right, we're asking good open ones, and we're asking them in the right order, but we're coming at it with judgment. Like, this is great that we've got curiosity and that we're trying to follow the right process, but unfortunately it comes with judgment. And so what we're going to get back is defensiveness and resistance rather than buy-in, right? Or over here, like if we've got lovely compassionate tone and we're moving in the right order, we've got the right intention, that's really good. But what we're going to develop are shallow responses. Yeah, like surface solutions, band-aids to big ones. We're never really going to dig down into the root cause of what we're trying to solve, because we are having asked the right questions. And so in, I don't know if anyone's familiar with investment logic mapping, but I did that training forever ago. And there's a great rule in there where they say, you should always ask why 5 times. And you usually start to get to the cause around the 3rd or the 5th one. So you can ask why once, like, oh, why aren't we making any money? Because nobody's buying our stuff. Yeah, right, good. You're like, why isn't anyone buying our stuff? Oh, Lucy says 7. Mate, the world is your oyster. There's an infinite number of whys. Be a 4-year-old. Just keep going. I love it. And continuing to ask questions like, yeah, but why aren't people buying our stuff? And sometimes it's because they don't like us or our thing's shit, which is what we assume. We've got to change our thing. No one's buying it. Or sometimes it's really easy stuff like, oh, our website's impossible to use. And I didn't know that because I didn't actually dig further and have a look, right? Or sometimes it's the context. We're pitching to a market right now that is under unprecedented funding constraint and they don't have it. So we either need to partner with them or do something else. But unless we keep digging, we don't really know. We just assume. And you all talked about assumptions at the start of this, and questions are the antidote, aren't they, to assumptions. So that's what we want to do. So I reckon tone, type, and timing, 3 most important things. But as you know, I always like to leave you with some takeaways, right? So it's all very well for me to stand here and say to you, all right, team, get your tone right, ask the right type of questions and get the timing right. And you're going to nod and you're going to go, Alicia, that makes perfect sense. And you're going to write it down and then you're going to go back to work and you're going to go, I don't know what to do now. Maybe if you're really lucky this afternoon, someone you don't like will cross your path. And then you get to practice assuming positive intent and go, hold on a second. Instead of judging you for the asshole you are, I'm going to say, what's that about? Right? Or I'm going to think to myself, why are they like this? In my blog post this week, I referenced Byron Katie's The Work. And like, it's a bit hippy dippy, but shit, it's good. And it's a self-reflection exercise where every time you think something, you have to ask these 4 questions of it. So every time you go to make a judgment and say, oh God, he's useless, he's never going to be any good, you have to ask these 4 questions before you get to commit to it. I don't know if I can remember them all now, but the first question is this true? So, I think John's useless. Is this true? Maybe. Can I absolutely know this is true? No, I can't absolutely know that because I don't know what's going on in John's head. I don't know what's going on in John's life, right? And then how do I respond or how do I react to that thought when I have it? Oh, I guess I'm kind of passive aggressive, a little bit sarcastic, probably a bit dismissive. Okay, I'm seeing what happens here when I believe that. And then who would I be? 4th question, who would I be if I didn't believe that thought, right? And then you go, right, well, I suppose if I wasn't walking around thinking that, I'd have a much nicer relationship with John because I wouldn't be so dismissive and passive aggressive. And if that happened, I'd probably just be a bit more open and we'd build a bit more trust. And then maybe he'd actually want to help me instead of dropping the ball all the time. Oh, okay, fine, I shouldn't be that person. I get it. Thanks for the 4 questions, right? And so it's just going through that process every time we get the judgment thing going, hold on. Is this actually true? Can I know that? And how does it make me when I do believe it? And what if I didn't? And I really like that process. All right, so 3 handy things you can do when it comes to asking tricky questions on the regular. Yeah? Number 1, default to questions. This is a really handy trick. It's the same as the spelling thing, right? Every time you get asked a question and your instinct is to answer it, hey, so this one's actually about you being asked questions, ask a question instead. How do I spell that? How do you think you spell that? What should I do here? What do you think you should do here? What did you do last time? What have you seen somebody else do? Right? Default to question. Oh, yeah, I love that, Lucy. You sound like a politician. Yeah, answering a question with a question. The other one is the fill a bit. Oh, yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. That's a great question. What I always say in my policy manifesto is, it has got nothing to do with what I asked. Yeah, brilliant. All right, so number 1, default to questions. When you find yourself wanting to answer something, see if you could use a question instead. Number 2, ask another one. This is so basic, team. When you think you're done, do it again. Ask another question. And you can practice this in conversation, which I think makes it really useful, and not just in a really loaded workplace or workshop type environment. So, you know, you've got a friend who's like, oh my God, my boss is such a bitch. And you could be like, yeah, I know, you're always telling me that, that sucks, and pour another glass of wine. Or you can ask clarifying questions using your journalist skills, right? With all your W's and be like, oh yeah. So like, what happens when she's a bitch? Oh, well, you know, she does these 6 things and, oh yeah, and why do you reckon she's like that? You know, you can, every time you think you're done, ask another one, and the quality of your conversation improves, the quality of your connection improves. And actually there's often some learning out of it too. Because once you've, I mean, it's not your job to counsel your friends or make them think better, but oftentimes what happens in a situation like that is they go, yeah, honestly, like she's having a hard time at the moment. Like, yeah, she's giving me really unreasonable deadlines, but the minister's just put this thing out and he wants it in 30 days and I don't know how we're going to pull it off. Or like, oh, she's actually having a really hard time with the kids. Or you go, oh yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So once you've pulled in those why, what's that about? What does that look like? How does it work? The quality of your conversation shoots up. And every time you think you're done, just ask another one. Like I think so often in conversation, we ask one question and then we think we're done. It's just not helpful. So 3 things you can do. 1, default to questions. 2, ask another one. And the third one, and this is counterintuitive and very important, shut up. Shut up. Ask a question and then shut up. Because what tends to happen is we ask a question and then someone gets partway through answering it and we interrupt them and go, oh, yeah, right, yeah. And then we share our thing. Or we ask a question, nobody answers it, and then we get a bit nervous and so we fill in the gap. Or we ask a question and our own anxiety about what the answer might be leads us to start diminishing the question we ask. And so you really see that in sales conversations, right? So you make an offer, you go, okay, well, that's great. I can do this at this time. Are you in? And then there's that scary bit in the middle, and before, in the silence, before the potential client has the chance to like think it through and say, oh yeah, or nah, you go, oh, but like, I know the timing might not work, and you probably don't have the budget, and I guess we could change these other, and you're like, just give them a chance. So in Meetings That Matter, when we talk about virtual facilitation, I always teach this handy trick where I go, the hardest thing and the most important thing about facilitating workshops online is developing the muscle to look down the camera lens, ask a question, and then smile stupidly for a full 20 seconds. And it is the most uncomfortable feeling for people to just sit there and wait with it, right? Because they're like, I look stupid, right? This is the judgment thing. I look stupid. People will think I look stupid. No. In an online workshop, what's happening is there's a few seconds delay where what you've said comes into someone's ears. And then there's a few seconds delay while they think about what you said. And then there's a few seconds delay after they write it. And then you see it. There's a whole process where even if there's an immediate response, you don't get it straight away. And it's really hard for people to think properly when you've rabbited on. And so ask one question and then wait for the answer rather than going, what do you think are the hardest things about asking questions? Yeah, and what I mean by that is like when you're going to ask it, right? So this is what we do. We can't help it. And so the number one skill, I think, when it comes to asking questions that get you responses that are useful is to shut up and wait. Because the best thing about that is other people are just as uncomfortable with silence as you are. And you can use that to your advantage. Because if you wait long enough, they will fill the gap. Won't be able to help it. The awkwardness will get too much for them and they will jump in and fill in the gap. He who speaks first loses, says Luke. Yeah, I love it. Ask another question. What are your salary expectations? Yeah, that's a good question. What have you budgeted for this position? Silence. All right, it is 1:51. I reckon we've got time for a couple of questions before we wrap up our 1 hour Tricky Questions webinar. I know, there's questions everywhere. It's so on brand. If there's anything in particular you would like to ask, chuck it in the chat box while I smile stupidly at the camera for 20 seconds. So it's 5 seconds in, I already feel weird. Where did the hour go? I mean, this is the thing. When you're having this much fun, it just flies by, doesn't it? Oh, you like my plants? Oh, Lucy, honestly, we can take this chat offline. I recently got into houseplants. I went from 6 to 112 in like 6 weeks. I'm all about plants, mate. We can have another chat about that. Okay. Kelly says, I'm about to go into a restructure consultation. How do I ask questions without being that person? That person being like the annoying one. Yeah. And so again, I think the trick is there. Take your own shit out of it, right? So the first thing that comes into the consultation process is you're freaking out, right? So you're freaking out about losing your job or about looking stupid. And so the first piece of judgment to remove is the self-judgment and just go, hold on. If I'm asking a question, there are without doubt other people that are thinking the same thing and don't have the courage to say it. So first of all, it's my responsibility to ask this question because other people are totally thinking it but don't have the courage to do it. So take the judgment away. Yeah, take it away from yourself. The next thing to do is to take the blame and the judgment out of the question that you need to ask of people, right? Because if you come off sounding all defensive and aggressive, going, yeah, but how do you think that's going to work? What about the people on the front line? Or whatever those things are. You go, whoa, whoa, whoa. And what you provoke is counter defensiveness in the people you're asking the question of. So if it's clear that you've got positive intent of the person you're asking the question of, that comes across, right? And sometimes that starts with a validating statement. So sometimes it starts by going, and this isn't a sandwich. I hate the sandwich thing. You know, the compliment, but it's going, yeah, I can see how this, I can see why this makes sense. Like, it makes sense to me that you'd put this team here. What I'm wondering is, how will it work if, right? Oh, okay. Hang on a second. You're wondering something. You don't think they're an idiot. You're not challenging them. You're wondering how something's going to work. Hey, I really like that we're thinking about how to run this place better, because it's been a weird couple of years. What do you think the impact might be on the people in Team Y? Oh, great. Good question. You're not coming at me. You're coming at the proposal. I can answer that. Yeah? And so it's judgment away from me first and from them second. What is the best first question to challenge groupthink, says Lucy? Oh, that's a good question. So see, that's the stalling thing. I just did it. Like, we all do it. Okay. So groupthink is when everybody agrees with each other. And actually, I think this is a really good question, because I think sometimes that's a format issue rather than a question issue. So there are some questions, particularly depending on how much trust you've established, that people are more than happy to dissent about in front of each other, right? So if you're operating in a situation where it's high trust, everyone gets along, you've been working together for a while, you can throw all sorts of shit out there and get good, open, reflective answers. But if you don't have that, or you think that people are going to default to the loudest or most superior voice in the room, don't ask them in a group. If it's important you get that question, don't ask them in a group. So what I'll often do before a workshop is, you know that whole story about the jelly beans? Like, if you ask a group of people how many jelly beans are in the jar, they're way off. But if you asked each of them individually to submit a guess and you took the average of that number, it's pretty bang on. So it's not that as a group we don't have really strong collective diverse intelligence, it's that we don't display it. So what we can do is ask for things individually. If we don't yet have the trust and the connection to do things in a way that's really open and collaborative, it's totally okay to send an email or to grab someone in the lunch break or to do an anonymous survey where you go, what do you think the biggest issue with X or Y is? And gather those responses, assuring them that that will be kept anonymous, and present that in the workshop and just say, hey, I actually sent something out. Thank you so much for filling it in. And I just wanted to know what you thought actually the biggest problems with this stuff is right now. And here's what you all told me. And isn't it funny? A lot of you said the same thing. And everyone goes, right? But you've given them a safe way to respond to that question. So groupthink is about making people safe. Groupthink is what happens when people aren't safe to dissent. And if you've made it safe, you've given them a safe format, if you can't give them a safe environment yet, then I think that's really useful. All right, we are at 1:56. Should I pick one more question and see what else I've missed? I think there was one earlier about trust. And all right, I'll pick up on the trust one. So I think it was, how do you establish trust, or what are the questions that you ask to build trust? And I think that's really important. And again, a lot of it's as much about tone as it is about the type of question. So people don't trust you if you come off judgy. But the other trick there is around, so if you've managed, so that's the judgment away from them, right? But if you can take the judgment away from yourself, vulnerability used carefully is a really good way to build trust. Because it's all very well to say that, to ask for something from someone else, because remember that questions give ownership to the answerer, but sometimes you need to put a bit of skin in the game first if you'd like to get that from someone else. And that requires a bit of careful vulnerability. So the best case example I have of this is a group manager at Auckland Council who runs a Fuck Up Fridays session every Friday. And so she stands up at the front of the room and she goes, all right, team, here's what I messed up this week. I tried to get that proposal, that business case through the investment board, totally dropped the ball on a really important section. So it didn't get through and we're going to have to try again next quarter. Sorry, team. I really should have thought about that ahead of time. And everyone goes, oh, cool, right. And what that does to build trust, that bit of vulnerability of just going, here's a way that I'm a human, right? Or sometimes when I walk into a conference and it's clear that there's been a lot of tension and I'm about to present but everyone's feeling a bit awkward, is I'll walk in and go, oh my God, I did not want to be here today and I nearly didn't even get here on time because of the traffic. What a morning. And people go, oh God, she's human. She's not here to inspire me like some kind of Beyonce robot. Like, she's a human too. Oh God, I trust her. And the third tip for trust, so be real, share things about yourself that aren't totally comfortable first. Go first. Let me put that easier. Number one, go first, right? Number two, be a bit vulnerable, be real. And the third one is to use the same language. So our brains really value processing fluency. It builds familiarity really quickly. And what's really hard is when we use language that's not totally familiar to the people we're speaking with. And there are particular professions that find this really hard. They like to speak in jargons. They like to speak in the buzzwords, the 3-letter acronyms, or they're so nervous about their own shit that they just go, we're doing an Agile Digital Transformation Initiative program, and what that's going to do is transformation for engagement, and therefore you will all be high performance and KPIs. And people are like, yeah, cool. All right, good for you, mate. Whereas if you're able to use like everyday language that can be easily processed, it just activates a thing in your brain that you're not even conscious of that builds trust. And that's different for different environments. And sometimes it actually requires doing the opposite. So if I have got a room of engineers and I drop a few civil construction terms early on, they're like, oh, mate, she speaks our language. Yeah, I can trust her. All right, so horses for courses, but that's my third tip. So trust, go first, be real, and use the same language would be my tips for that. All right, everyone, it is 1:59, but you're all running away from me, and rightly so. Before we go in the chat, could you leave me your one takeaway from today? As always, we covered a lot, and it's useful for everyone if you share what you found to be most useful. 3 T's says so. Yeah, tone, timing, type. Great. 3 T's, earn the right to ask, use vulnerability carefully. Practical strategy, great. Oh, the 3 things is how, yeah, default, ask again, shut up. Compassionate curiosity, this is great. Steve's still stuck on the cockroaches, oh mate. Compassionate curiosity, fantastic. Andrea needs to learn to shut up. You and me both, mate. You and me both. It's hard for everyone. Hey, that's fantastic. You guys have been absolutely brilliant today. And as always, I loved having you. Thank you for joining me in my new home. And I will see you all again soon. Ka kite, everyone.